Good afternoon, everyone. We're glad you're here with us today. I'm going to shut off my video just so we can focus on this. Okay, so what we want to do, Mark, if you want to move to the next slide, that would be helpful. So we want to start by talking about the types and sources of financial aid. There are three major types of financial aid: gift aid, student employment, and student loans. Gift aid is money that does not need to be earned nor repaid, such as grants and scholarships. Grants are usually based on the student's financial need. Scholarships are generally based on talent and/or merit, such as academic, artistic, or athletic talent. Student employment programs, such as federal work-study, provide opportunities for students to earn money to help pay for school expenses. Both students and parents can borrow from a variety of low-interest education loan programs designed to help with the educational expenses of the student. Student loans usually do not require repayment until the student is no longer in school. Parent loans may require payment while the student is still in school. Let's talk now about the sources of financial aid. There are several different sources of financial aid, including the largest being the federal government, state government, as well as the colleges and universities themselves. Private agencies, companies, foundations, and maybe even the students' parents and employers may provide scholarships for college. Though important, these sources provide less than 6% of the total financial aid awarded to students. Check with each of the private agencies, companies, and foundations to which the student wishes to apply about application forms and deadlines. Scholarship search websites such as fastweb.com and bigfuture.collegeboard.org are good resources for such scholarships. Obviously, so is Central Scholarship. Next slide, please. Undergraduate and graduate students should file the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, to apply for financial aid from the federal and state governments and most colleges. The Student Aid Index, or SAI, previously known as the Expected Family Contribution, or EFC, is a measure of the family's financial strength and is calculated using the financial and demographic information reported on the FAFSA. About 200 mostly private colleges require a supplemental form, the College Scholarship Service, or CSS, profile. They use that for awarding their own financial aid funds. Students at these colleges must still complete the FAFSA to apply for federal and state financial aid. Let's talk now about what is financial need. Next slide, please. Total annual college costs include more than just tuition and fees. It also includes food and housing, textbooks, transportation, and miscellaneous personal expenses. There are 4 housing allowances for students living on campus, at home with family, off campus in an apartment, and on a military base. On campus, living on campus yields the most financial aid. Beware of colleges underestimating allowances for some costs, such as transportation, textbooks, and personal expenses. If the figures are low, keep receipts and ask the financial aid office for an adjustment to the total annual cost of attendance. Financial need is a measure of how much you'll need to help you pay for college costs after subtracting your ability to pay for college from total annual college costs. You'll see it in the second to the last bullet on the slide. The net price is the amount you'll have to pay for college after subtracting grants and scholarships, from total annual college costs. It sometimes is viewed as the discounted sticker price, how much the student and his or her family will have to pay from savings, income, and loans to cover the annual college costs. More than 80% of colleges practice front-loading of grants, where there is a better mix of grants and scholarships during the student's first year. This means that the net price may increase significantly in subsequent years. Everybody should file the FAFSA every year. Families have a tendency to underestimate eligibility for need-based aid and overestimate eligibility for merit-based aid. A student who is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident is eligible for federal and state student aid even if their parents are undocumented. Permanent residents and eligible non-citizens will have a green card with an 8 or 9-digit alien registration number. Next slide, please. So who's eligible for need-based student aid? Students cannot get financial aid if they don't apply. Students must have a high school diploma, a GED, or the equivalent to be eligible for need-based aid. Secondary school students in dual enrollment programs are not eligible for college financial aid. Students who already have a bachelor's degree are ineligible for the federal Pell Grant, Federal Supplemental Grant, or FSEOG, or the TEACH grant. Students who are enrolled at least half-time are eligible for student loans. The parent loan borrowers must not have an adverse credit history. That's the parent loan to undergraduate students. Eligibility for some financial aid is based on financial need and some is based on merit. The student must also maintain what the government calls satisfactory academic progress, or SAP. That is, they have to have at least a 2.0 grade point average on a 4.0 scale, and they must be on track to graduate within 150% of the normal time frame. The student must also not be in default on a federal student loan or owe a refund on a federal student grant or loan overpayment. Next slide, please. When is the best time to file the FAFSA? The FAFSA became available on December 31st of 2023. It will return to an October 1 start date beginning later this fall. So if a student is interested in financial aid for the 25-26 academic year, it will launch October 1st. Students who file the FAFSA in the first 3 months tend to get more than double the amount of grants on average of students who file the FAFSA later. Keep in mind, some colleges have very early deadlines. More than 24 states, including the state of Maryland, have October through March deadlines. The deadline in Maryland is March 1st. Each college has a fixed allocation of federal funds, such as the Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant and federal work-study funding. Students should not wait until he or she is admitted by a college to file the FAFSA. The FAFSA must be filed by June 30th of the award year or the last day of the academic year, whichever comes first. So the filing period for the FAFSA is 21 months long. So the filing deadline to file the FAFSA for the 24-25 year will be June 30th, 2025, or the last day of the academic year, whichever comes first. Next slide, please. Let's look at the left-hand side of the slide first. Filling out the FAFSA is easier if you gather some records together, some documents. Students should keep a copy of all forms they submit and copies of all documentation used to complete those forms in case their FAFSA is selected for a process called verification. The FAFSA Submission Summary, or FSS, is the new name for what used to be known as the Student Aid Report, or the SAR. So be sure to keep copies of a confirmation page that the student receives once the FAFSA is completed, and the FAFSA Submission Summary once that is produced. We'll talk more about the timing of the FAFSA in just a moment. We also encourage families to get an IRS tax return transcript if they cannot use a service called the IRS Direct Data Exchange. Again, Mark will explain that in more detail. On the right-hand side of the screen is a list of those documents that will be helpful in completing the FAFSA. If the student is a U.S. permanent resident or an eligible non-citizen, the FAFSA will ask for their alien registration number. The alien registration number, sometimes called an A number or an A number or an AR number, is an 8 or 9-digit identification number assigned to non-citizens. This is the same as the 9-digit U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services number on the permanent resident green card. What else will be helpful? A copy of your Social Security card and a copy of the student's Social Security card. When information is being entered on the FAFSA, it will ask for the student's name exactly as it appears on their Social Security card. And we want the student and parent to indicate their Social Security number, again, as it is listed on the Social Security card. Copies of your 2022 W-2 and 1099 forms, or any other records of monies earned and any other taxable benefits. What else will be helpful? A copy of your 2022 federal income tax return, records of untaxed income, current bank and brokerage account statements. Bank accounts include checking and savings accounts, money markets accounts, and CDs, certificates of deposit. And you also want to include any Uniform Gift to Minors Act, UGMA, or Uniform Transfer to Minors Act, UTMA accounts. What will also be helpful? Records of debts secured by reportable assets. The net worth of an asset is reduced by any debts that are secured by the asset. For example, the value of a brokerage account is reduced by any margin loans. Do not include the net worth of retirement plans or the family home as assets on the FAFSA. But if you have other real estate, that will be considered an investment on the FAFSA. Mark, at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, David. So now let's talk about applying for financial aid. To apply for financial aid using the FAFSA in 2024-25, the student and their parent, if applicable, should get an FSA ID at studentaid.gov/FSAID. The FSA ID is a username and password combination that can be used to access certain U.S. Department of Education websites and to sign the online FAFSA form electronically. When creating an FSA ID, it is important to list the student's name exactly as it is shown on the student's Social Security card. The online FAFSA will ask for the student's first and last name. For example, report Susan Jones, not Susie Jones or S. Jones, if Susan is the student's first name on the Social Security card. Otherwise, there will be a data mismatch. The FSA ID provides self-service password retrieval by email if the student forgot or the parent forgot their password. The FSA ID allows for name changes, such as through marriage, without requiring a new FSA ID. It is important to write down your FSA ID username and password and the challenge questions and answers in case they cannot be remembered. After you write down your FSA ID, take a picture with your mobile phone so you always have it available to you. Complete and submit the 2024-25 FAFSA at FAFSA.gov. The sooner you submit it, the better, since some financial aid funds are limited and may run out. It may take less time to complete the 2024-25 FAFSA due to FAFSA simplification, maybe as little as about 15 minutes. After submitting the completed and electronically signed 2024-25 FAFSA online, print or save a copy of the confirmation page. This page will contain a confirmation stamp showing the date and time that the online FAFSA was successfully submitted. The confirmation page also includes the student aid index and estimated federal Pell Grant eligibility and federal student loan eligibility. It also lists the colleges that will receive the FAFSA data. The federal Pell Grant is a federal grant worth up to $7,395 that was for the 2023-24 award year. Congress has not yet set it for the 24-25 award year, and it's based on the student's calculated financial need and enrollment status. Now, there's a new term on the FAFSA, several new terms, one of which is contributor. Anybody who provides data on the FAFSA, that's the student, the parents, the student spouse, if they're married, is considered to be a contributor. And this year, the IRS data retrieval tool has been replaced with the IRS Direct Data Exchange. And each contributor must authorize and consent to the transfer of their federal tax information to the FAFSA. Otherwise, if they don't complete their part of the form and don't consent to transfer of their federal tax information, the student will be ineligible for federal and state student aid. Now, we often get questions about the privacy of FAFSA information. One of the reasons why there is a separate contributor process this year is to ensure that contributors can see only their own information, not information provided by another contributor. So the student can't see the parent information, and the parents can't see the student information. Also, contributor information is not shared with the Department of Homeland Security or Immigration Enforcement. As a matter of law, they cannot see that. So if a student's a U.S. citizen, they are eligible for federal student aid regardless of the citizenship status or immigration status of their parents, and the parents don't have to worry about providing that information on the FAFSA. It does not get shared outside of the U.S. Department of Education. Now, often a source of potential confusion on the FAFSA is what year's information is reported on the FAFSA. And it differs based on the type of financial information. Assets are reported as of the date the FAFSA is filed. They are usually reported based on who owns the account, not the beneficiary of the account. However, there is an exception for custodial 529 plan accounts, where the student is both the account owner and the beneficiary. Those are reported as a parent asset on the FAFSA. And that's beneficial to the family because parent assets are assessed at a lower rate than student assets. This year, for the first time, parent-owned 529 plans for siblings are not reported as assets on the student's FAFSA, only on their own FAFSA. And also, there's a change that grandparent-owned 529 plans, as well as 529 plans owned by anybody other than the student or parent, are not just not reported on the FAFSA, but distributions are no longer reported as well. So they will have no impact on aid eligibility. Now, starting with the 2017-2018 academic year, income reported on the FAFSA has been based on the second previous tax year, otherwise known as a prior year. For example, the 2024-25 FAFSA is based on income and tax information from 2022. Most people will file their federal income tax returns by the start date for the FAFSA. If the student or parent federal income tax returns have not been filed as of the date of FAFSA submission, for example, members of the U.S. Armed Forces who are serving on active duty in a combat zone are not required to file it on time. They have 180 days after they return from their deployment to file their federal income tax return. So most assign someone a power of attorney to file on their behalf. It is if you don't have that information because you weren't required to file, it is okay to use estimated income information. Now, do not substitute 2023 income information, even if it's available and even if it is lower. If your income has decreased, contact the College Financial Aid Office to ask how to file a financial aid appeal. Because income is reported from the prior year, any distributions that are received on or after January 1st of the sophomore year in college will not be reported on the FAFSA if the student graduates within 4 years. If the student takes longer to graduate, the income might have an impact. If there's any uncertainty about when the student will graduate, some families will wait until after the FAFSA is filed or even after the student graduates before taking distributions from 529 plans, retirement plans, and the like, because those might artificially increase income. Now, dependency status is now known as personal circumstances, and it's important because it determines whether or not parent information is required on the FAFSA. If the student's an independent student, parent information is not required, which can have a big impact on eligibility for need-based financial aid. Now, you might hear about an old rule that in 1992 and before, a student could be considered independent if they earned at least $4,000 a year and were not claimed on their parents' federal income tax return for 2 years. This was called the Bright Line Test. It was prone to abuse, so Congress repealed it, replacing it with the current set of dependency status questions. Now, none of the following criteria, either alone or in combination, is sufficient for a college to perform a dependency override, which is the last option for a student to become an independent student. So if the student is financially self-sufficient, does not live with his or her parents, is not claimed as an exemption on the parent's federal income tax return, and the parents refuse to complete the FAFSA, participate in verification, pay for college, or live in a foreign country, all of those in combination are not sufficient for the student to be considered an independent student, and they're not enough for the college to perform a dependency override. We'll get into dependency overrides in a bit. Now, on the right-hand side, you see the dependency status questions, and I'd like to add a few insights on them. To be considered a veteran on the FAFSA, the student must have served at least 1 day on active duty, including for basic training, and have been discharged under any condition other than dishonorable. Now, there are some conditions that sound like dishonorable, but they are not dishonorable. So the actual wording matters. The character of service appears in box 24 of the DD 214, and it includes honorable, under honorable conditions, general, under other than honorable conditions, bad conduct, and uncharacterized. Now, this definition of veteran status is different than the veteran status for VA benefits. This is only for independent student status on the FAFSA. Now, ROTC students are not considered to be veterans. A student who is an orphan, in foster care, or ward of the court at any point after reaching age 13 is considered to be independent, even if the student is subsequently adopted or is no longer in foster care when the FAFSA is filed. A student who is adopted prior to reaching age 13 is not considered to be an orphan on the FAFSA. Now, ward of the court is not the same as ward of the state. Incarceration does not make a student independent. With ward of the court, the court has asserted parental authority over the student, terminating the parental rights and obligations of the student's legal parents. Ward of the state is merely incarceration of the student, where the state has custody of the student, but is not serving in a parental role. Now, a potential source of confusion is the word emancipation. Emancipation as part of a divorce decree indicates that the end of child support obligations because a child has reached the age of majority. That is not the same as emancipation, emancipated minor, where the student is becoming an adult prior to reaching the age of majority. So, emancipated minor is an independent student. Emancipation as part of a divorce decree is still a dependent student. With regard to legal guardianship, a guardianship drafted by an attorney is not sufficient. It must be determined by a court in the student's state of legal residence. If the student's parent or step-parent is a guardian, that's not enough. Legal custody does not qualify as legal guardianship. Because of recent sham guardianships, where the parents were still supporting the child, legal guardianships will undergo greater scrutiny even if they are court ordered. Now let's talk about dependency override. If the student's parents refuse to complete the FAFSA, the most financial aid an eligible dependent student can receive is an unsubsidized federal direct Stafford loan, unless the financial aid administrator performs a dependency override. The parents no longer have to cut off all financial support for the student to receive just an unsubsidized federal direct Stafford loan. Now, a dependency override can change a student's dependency status from dependent to independent, but not from independent to dependent. Independent students are not required to provide parent income, asset, and demographic information on the FAFSA. The student cannot simply declare themselves independent if they don't satisfy any of the requirements to be automatically considered an independent student. Now, dependency overrides are for extreme situations which involve an involuntary dissolution of the family, often where it is unsafe for the student to have contact with their parents. This could include incarceration or institutionalization of both parents, an abusive home environment, abandonment, parents' whereabouts unknown, death of the custodial parent, often in combination with the other parents has abandoned them or their whereabouts are unknown. The student will need to provide independent third-party documentation, such as reports from police or law enforcement and the courts, letters from clergy, school counselors, social workers, and others who are familiar with the student's situation. College financial aid administrators can now rely on a dependency override provided during a previous year, assuming there is no conflicting information. So this should reduce the number of times a student must ask for a dependency override. And previously, students had to ask for a dependency override every year. Now, only the FAFSA makes the question of who's your daddy or who's your mommy complicated. In addition to biological or adoptive parents, parents on the FAFSA now include a parent who is listed on the student's birth certificate, even if they aren't a biological or adoptive parent. Same-sex parents and unmarried parents are also considered to be parents on the FAFSA. It does not matter if the parent is undocumented or a foreign national, the parent does not live in the US, or the marriage occurred outside the US. They're still considered to be a parent. A step-parent is considered to be a parent on the FAFSA only for as long as they are married to the student's custodial parent. Custodial parent refers to the parent who is responsible for completing the FAFSA, and it's not necessarily the same as the parent who has legal custody. Now, if this custodial parent dies, or the step-parent gets divorced, the step-parent is no longer considered to be a parent on the FAFSA unless they have legally adopted the student. Parents on the FAFSA do not include grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, or cousins, even if the student is living with them and is financially supported by them. The only exception is if they have legally adopted the student. Now, students in a court-ordered legal guardianship or foster care are considered to be independent students, and their parents, their foster parents, aren't parents on the FAFSA. Now, let's dig in a little deeper. What if the parents are divorced or separated? If the parents who are divorced, separated, or never married live together, they are treated as though they are married, even regardless of their marital status or relationship to each other, because the FAFSA cares more about their relationship to the student than with their relationship to each other. Now, if the parent are divorced, it's only one parent or separated, only one parent is required to complete the FAFSA. This is the parent who provided more financial support during the 12 months ending on the date the FAFSA is submitted. This is different from last year, where it was based on where the student lived. The parent responsible for completing the FAFSA, as I said before, is often referred to as a custodial parent, even if they don't have legal custody, even if the child lives with the other parent more. It's whichever parent provides more financial support. If they provide equal amount of financial support down to the penny, then it's whichever parent has the greater income, including the income of any step parents if they have remarried. Now, the IRS Direct Data Exchange replaces the IRS data retrieval tool and is mandatory this year. There's only one main set of families that will not be able to use the IRS Direct Data Exchange, and that's parents who are divorced or separated now, but did file a married filing joint tax return in 2 years prior, because apparently the U.S. Department of Education hasn't yet figured out how to separate that income, at least not with the data they have available. Now, any data element that is transferred from the federal income tax return into the FAFSA is not subject to verification. They assume that people don't lie to the IRS. This will significantly reduce the likelihood that a FAFSA will be selected for verification. In previous years, as many as a third of students were selected for verification. In recent years, that was reduced to 16 or 18%. This year, it's going to be in the single digits because income was the most common aspect of the FAFSA, most common data element that was subject to verification. Now, if you do not use the IRS Direct Data Exchange and your FAFSA is selected for verification, you may be required to provide an IRS tax return transcript. That's different than an IRS tax account transcript. If you are unable to use the IRS Direct Data Exchange, it is a good idea to request a tax return transcript now so that you have it on hand in case it is needed. In particular, if your address has changed, and the IRS will only send, if you are unable to use the online get transcript tool, the IRS will mail it only to the address on record. So you might have to file IRS Form 8822 to change your address with the IRS. That can take 4 to 6 weeks. Getting a paper tax return transcript can take 4 to 6 weeks. That's why you need to get it now if there's a reason why you can't use the IRS Direct Data Exchange. Now, taxpayers who file a foreign income tax return, in addition to or instead of a U.S. tax return, should use the corresponding figures from the foreign income tax return, as well as a U.S. tax return if they have one. And they need to express this in U.S. dollars using the currency exchange rates in effect on the date the FAFSA is filed. Currency exchange rates can be found on federalreserve.gov. If your IRS file has been locked by the IRS because of tax identity theft, you will need to wait until this problem is resolved by the IRS to use the IRS Direct Data Exchange. Yeah. Now, you need to get an IRS tax return transcript, not an IRS tax account transcript. If you were not required to file a 2022 federal income tax return, the college may ask you to provide an IRS verification of non-filing letter This is handled by the IRS Direct Data Exchange this year, so they will not ask you for it directly. You can request a tax transcript by a toll-free number or online, or by filing a paper form. As I said before, and if it's by telephone or by a paper form, they will only send the tax return transcript to the address that they have on record. Now, there are two forms that are easily confused. One is IRS Form 4506-T, and the other is IRS Form 4506. You want to use the -T version of the form. It is a free form. The 4506 version of the form charges a $50 fee. And that's for an actual copy of your tax return as filed, not just a tax return transcript. You just need the transcript. Okay. So if there's a fee, you're filing the wrong form. If a married taxpayer files a joint return, only the taxpayer listed first on the joint return can get a tax return transcript using the IRS website. If you can't use the online Get Transcript tool, you will need to submit IRS Form 4506-T by postal mail. And some families have reported that it can take at least as long as a month, maybe longer, before they receive a paper IRS tax return transcript or the verification of non-filing letter. If your address has changed, use IRS Form 8822, as I mentioned before, to change your address with the IRS. And this can take 4 to 6 weeks as well. Now, the colleges that are listed on the FAFSA are no longer shared with the colleges, because there was a problem several years ago where some colleges were using this information to say, if you didn't list us in the first 3 slots, you probably, we're a safety school and we're not going to admit you because you probably won't enroll. This was a violation of federal law. The U.S. Department of Education responded by no longer sharing that information with the colleges. But there are still reasons why the order of the colleges on the FAFSA matters. Always list an in-state public college first on the FAFSA to ensure that you qualify for state grants. If you don't list a Maryland school first on the FAFSA, you might not qualify for Maryland state grants. So you need to focus and do that one first. And next, I suggest listing the colleges in order of financial aid deadline to ensure that they receive your FAFSA information by their priority deadline. Now, this year, everything is up in the air because the FAFSA is delayed. So the colleges are going to have to be accommodating for late FAFSAs being filed. This year, the number of colleges listed on the online FAFSA has increased from 10 to 20. Now, you really shouldn't be applying to more than 20 colleges. But if you are, you can list more than 20 colleges by deleting the old colleges and adding the new colleges after the old colleges receive your FAFSA information. Receipt of the FAFSA submission summary, previously known as a student aid report or SAR, is an indication that the colleges have received their institutional student information record, or ISER, which includes the student's FAFSA data, just not the list of colleges. Unfortunately, this has been delayed until sometime in March, maybe even later. So it's going to be a challenge for students to add more colleges in a timely manner, but the colleges are delaying their deadline, so maybe it'll work out. Now, in addition to using the FAFSA website to add more colleges, students can also add more colleges by calling the Federal Student Aid Information Center at 1-800-4FED-AID, which is 1-800-433-3243, and using the data release number, or DRN, from the FAFSA submission summary. Obviously, right now, the Federal Student Aid Information Center is getting millions of calls, and they are unable to pick up the phone or respond in a timely manner. If you do need to reach them, try calling first thing in the morning, because that seems to be when there are less people waiting for them to pick up. Now, the federal school code number on the FAFSA is not the same as the school codes used on the SAT, ACT, or CSS profile. You can find a college's federal school code on the college's website or on the FAFSA Federal School Code search tool. Now, I'm listing some of the most common errors on the FAFSA. Many of these errors occur when the parents create an FSA ID for the student or vice versa. Oftentimes, the parents may swap the student's social security number with their own, or the social security number of a sibling, or maybe they'll start the FAFSA with their own FSA ID instead of the student's FSA ID. If you enter cents on the FAFSA, you will increase the dollar amounts by a factor of 100 because the FAFSA ignores decimal points. So if you do $100.01, that's like $10,001. It is important to use the actual Social Security card or alien registration card instead of using your memory. So make sure that your name and Social Security number are exactly as they appear on the Social Security card. Typos in the Social Security number are quite common. I mean, a couple percent of the time, people misremember their Social Security number. Double check that there are no digit transpositions. Also, the Social Security cards show your legal name. Do not use a middle name or nickname instead of your first name. Double check their date of birth, especially for swapping month and day or an error in the year of birth. You'd be surprised how often people do not remember their birthday. Now, tax preparers sometimes claim head of household status even when the taxpayer is ineligible because it can yield a lower tax liability, but they're not eligible for it. And the fact that the IRS has not audited them yet doesn't mean that they were entitled to claim that status. And college financial aid administrators have been told by the U.S. Department of Education to watch out for situations where the parents are not eligible to both claim head of household status or one of them to claim it. Now, qualified retirement plans include 401k, 403b, IRA, Roth 401k, SEP, Simple, KEOG, and pension plans. For the family home to be excluded, the family must live in that home. It can't be a home that they used to live in but no longer live in. Can't be a vacation home or rental real estate or an apartment that they rent out. The family's share of the net worth of other real estate, such as investment real estate or a timeshare, is reported as an asset on the FAFSA. Net worth is the current market value minus any debts that are secured by the asset. So if you have a home equity loan that you use on your primary home that you use to buy a vacation home, it doesn't reduce the value of that vacation home because it's secured by your primary home, not the vacation home. Now, rental properties are usually reported as investments, not businesses. To be reported as a business, the real estate must be owned by a formally recognized business and provide additional services beyond renting out the property. For example, a hotel is a business, while a timeshare or vacation home is an investment. Foster care and adoption assistance payments are not reported on the FAFSA. Don't confuse supplemental security income, SSI, with Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, despite the similar acronyms. They are different. Don't confuse the Earned Income Tax Credit with income earned from work, even though both terms mention earned income. Don't miss the federal, state, or college deadlines. Some financial aid is awarded on a first come, first served basis until the money runs out. Students who file the FAFSA sooner tend to get more grants than students who file the FAFSA later. And the number one error is failing to apply for financial aid. You can't get financial aid if you don't apply. For example, this chart shows over time students who would have been eligible for a Pell Grant but didn't file the FAFSA. In 2019-2020, more than 2 million students who did not file the FAFSA would have qualified for the federal Pell Grant. And of these students, 1.3 million of them would have qualified for the maximum federal Pell Grant. So they're literally leaving money on the table. Okay, now here's a topic that everybody wants to know, which is how do you increase your eligibility for student financial aid? So first, remember the FAFSA is based on 2-year-old income information. You should try to avoid artificially increasing that income during that prior year and subsequent years, since that will decrease eligibility for need-based financial aid. And artificial increases include capital gains, unless you've offset them with capital losses, stock options, bonuses, taking distributions from retirement plans. Even a tax-free return of contributions from a Roth IRA will count as untaxed income on the FAFSA. Now, a good trick is to pay down debt that is not secured by a reportable asset, because that makes the cash disappear on the FAFSA. Paying off high interest debt with low interest savings also makes good financial planning sense. You'll save money by paying off that debt. Retirement plan contributions to a 401k this year are going to be ignored on the FAFSA because they do not show up on the federal income tax return. But contributions to an IRA do not reduce total income during the base year, since they get added back as untaxed income because they are reported on the federal income tax return. But nevertheless, contributions to an IRA do reduce reportable assets, especially if they're done for several years in advance. Parent information is not required for independent students. Sometimes this will increase the student's financial aid eligibility. Sometimes it doesn't. And counterintuitive, but it does happen in rare circumstances. Choosing the parent with a lower income when the parents are divorced or separated and don't live together will often increase financial aid eligibility because financial aid eligibility depends significantly on parent income. However, if this parent remarries, the step-parent's income and assets must also be reported, as well as children from previous marriages, if they receive more than half their support and live with the step-parent. So sometimes a step-parent may reduce aid eligibility due to an increase in income and assets, or increase aid eligibility due to an increase in family size, depending on the specific circumstances. Okay, so now we're showing you what the confirmation page looks like. You can see the completion date, the data release number, and the red arrows pointing at the student aid index. Not everybody is going to see this page because there are now multiple contributors. If the parents can complete their part before the student completes their part, then the student will see this confirmation page. But if the student completes their part first, then the parents second, then they will not see this and they have to wait until they receive the FAFSA submission summary to get their student aid index. Also, the U.S. Department of Education is in the process of updating inflationary adjustments on the tables behind the FAFSA. And so the student aid index may actually change from the one that they saw initially. So wait until you get the FAFSA submission summary to rely on that student aid index number. Okay, and this confirmation page will also potentially, doesn't seem like it's doing right now, show the estimated Pell Grant eligibility and federal student loan eligibility. You should print or save a copy of this confirmation page. Okay, now I'll turn it back over to David for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Mark. What we'd like to do now is to go over some application filing tips, some things to remember as you're filling out the online FAFSA. Be sure to gather necessary documents ahead of time so that completing the application is faster and easier. Students and parents should each get their own FSA ID, again at studentaid.gov/FSA ID. Complete the online FAFSA application by going to fafsa.gov. Allow ample time to complete the FAFSA for submission by published deadline dates. It's best to submit the FAFSA at least 10 days before the earliest of the college financial aid deadlines. Don't wait until the day the application is due. Assume the electronic deadline is East Coast time. Check the online FAFSA for accuracy prior to submission. Sign the FAFSA using the student's and one custodial parent's FSA ID. Print out a copy of the online FAFSA before submitting data electronically. And print and save a copy of the FAFSA confirmation page and the FAFSA submission summary, the FSS, for your financial aid summary. Next slide, please. On the FAFSA, income is based on the prior year, while assets are as of the date the FAFSA is filed. For assets, use the most recent account statements or a printout from the asset accounts website. If a dollar amount is greater than the size of the field, enter all nines. Financial aid doesn't transfer from the student's previous college to a new college if they're planning to transfer. So a transfer student must add the new college to their FAFSA. The parent educational level determines whether the student is a first-generation college student. First generation now means that the student's parents did not attend college. If a student's sibling received a college degree, the student is still considered a first-generation college student. The answer should be based on the student's biological or adoptive parents, not their legal guardians, not their step-parents or foster parents. This question does not affect eligibility for federal financial aid. Some states have different definitions of a first-generation college student, with some defining it as parents who never attended college, some are defining it as parents not having a college degree or certificate, and some parents as not having a bachelor's degree. The government has determined that first generation means that the student's parents did not attend college. Parents who do not have a valid Social Security number can get an FSA ID for the first time in 24-25. They can no longer print and sign a signature page. In fact, there is not a signature page. Just a reminder that if someone provides false information on the FAFSA, the penalties include fines of up to $20,000 and up to 5 years in jail. Plus, the student will have to repay all of the student aid they receive. Some colleges will even expel the student for violating the college's honor code. The penalties can be increased because you also violated mail and wire fraud statutes. Don't assume that you'll be able to get away with lying on the FAFSA. Financial aid administrators have more experience detecting inaccurate information than families have in lying on the FAFSA. You will get caught, and it will ruin your student's life. Next slide, please. Let's talk now about the FAFSA submission summary. The FAFSA you will receive a FAFSA submission summary, or an FSS, within a few weeks after you file the FAFSA. The FSS is the new name for the SAR. It will be sent electronically to the student. For those of you that have already filed a FAFSA, that document has not been sent to students yet. The Department of Education has said they will start sending this out sometime in early to mid-March. We think it may even be later than that. It will be sent electronically to the student. If the student does not provide a valid email address, a paper FSS will be mailed to the student at the address entered on the FAFSA. So what we are suggesting is if you do not receive a FAFSA submission summary by mid-March, you should contact the federal processor to check on the status of your FAFSA. You should call 1-800-4-FED, that's F-E-D, AID, A-I-D. Numerically, that's 1-800-433-3243, or check on the status of your FAFSA by going to fafsa.gov using the student's FSA ID. The student can make corrections on the electronic or paper FAFSA submission summary, as well as add additional colleges will then be sent the student's information. Each college or university the student lists on the FAFSA will receive what's called an Institutional Student Information Report, or ISER. This is an electronic record of all the information the family reported on the FAFSA. Students should make sure to keep a copy of the FAFSA submission summary with the rest of their financial aid documents. Private scholarship agencies may require a copy of the FAFSA submission summary as part of their application materials. Next slide, please. After the student is admitted, the college will send a financial aid offer or notification to the student based on the student's FAFSA data. The financial aid package is probably going to include a mix of grants, work, and loans from the federal and state government, the college, and other sources. The student should ask questions once they receive this notification. They should ask questions such as, are these grants renewable? Is there any unmet need? That is a gap between the financial aid that's being awarded and the amount the college has calculated in terms of their financial aid eligibility. They'll be able to look and ask questions about how much of the financial need is met with loans and grants, and what are the terms and conditions of the financial aid. For example, if the student's being awarded a grant or a scholarship, is there a grade point average requirement? Must they complete a certain number of units? Must they perform some community service? Students should compare the financial aid offers based on the net price. Again, the net price is the difference between the total annual college costs, including tuition and fees, food and housing, books, supplies and equipment, transportation, and miscellaneous and personal expenses. So it's the difference between the total annual college cost and just the gift aid, that is grants, scholarships, and other monies that do not need to be repaid. Let's talk now, next slide please. If your ability to pay for college is affected by special circumstances, file an appeal for more financial aid with each college financial aid office. Special circumstances include differences such as changes in income from the base year or anything that distinguishes your family's finances from that of a typical family. Keep in mind, the 24-25 FAFSA is based on 2022 income. If you've lost your job, been furloughed, had a pay cut, or experienced a reduction in assets because of COVID-19 or the coronavirus, file an appeal for more financial aid. If you've been unable to work because of stay-at-home orders, quarantine, or you or a family member contacted COVID-19, file an appeal for more financial aid. If you have unreimbursed medical or dental expenses because of the pandemic, file an appeal for more financial aid with the colleges the student is considering. Dislocated workers include people who have become unemployed because of a natural disaster, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Kantrowitz wrote a best-selling book about how to appeal for more financial aid for college. The book's webpage at kantrowitz.com/books/appeal, you'll see it in the left-hand column, includes a free downloadable tip sheet that reveals the basics about how to appeal for more financial aid. It tells you what to include in the letter. It includes information about when you should send that letter, where you should send it. There are the examples you see on the right-hand side are just some examples. They are not an inclusive or comprehensive list. But one of the things we have noticed is that families that have been adversely affected by COVID-19 can write a letter of special circumstances. Did you know, for example, that the COVID-19 pandemic is now considered by the federal government to be a natural disaster? If you have a special needs child or an elderly parent, and there are costs associated with that individual, or you've had a special circumstance due to a job loss, a salary reduction, or even a death or disability, I encourage you to access that free tip sheet. It will help you in writing that letter of special circumstances. Next slide, please. In order to ensure that information provided by students and parents is accurate, the Department of Education requires colleges and universities to verify the accuracy of financial and other demographic information provided on the FAFSA. That process is called verification. Verification of FAFSA data helps colleges and universities accurately and equitably determine the types and amounts of federal funding students will receive. Students whose FAFSA data is chosen for verification will see an asterisk next to the Student Aid Index or Student Aid or SAI on their FAFSA submission summary. If the student's FAFSA is selected for verification, the tax information of federal tax filers will be verified by the IRS Direct Data Exchange or the IRS tax return transcripts if those are requested by the university. Tax return transcripts are available free of charge, and there's a toll-free number if you want to request it. The toll-free number is 1-800-908-9946. If you'd like to get that IRS tax return transcript, you can call 1-800-908-9946. By the way, they are closed today for the President's Day holiday. Non-tax filers selected for verification may be asked to provide a signed statement confirming that they did not file a 2022 federal tax return and were not required by the IRS to do so. They may also be asked to provide copies of W-2s or other documentation from each employer if any income was earned from work. Selected aid applicants may also be asked to verify certain demographic data listed, such as household size and number in college, enrollment history for transfer students, and identity confirmation. Some colleges and universities may require the verification of additional information for determining eligibility for state and their own institutional aid funds. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at this overview of how the financial aid process works. This is a quick summary. Parents and students should each get their own FSA ID. Keep in mind that if a student gets an FSA ID for their parent, that is considered a form of identity theft. If a parent gets an FSA ID for the student, that is also considered a form of identity theft. Students and families should review college and financial aid deadline dates. Be sure to gather all documents we've listed that are needed to complete the FAFSA. Complete the FAFSA at fafsa.gov. The IRS Direct Data Exchange will transfer information from a person's federal income tax returns into the FAFSA. As Mark pointed out previously, students can list up to 20 colleges at a time on the FAFSA. The FAFSA should be signed with the student should sign their FAFSA with their FSA ID. The parents should sign their section of the FAFSA with their FSA ID. Students will receive a confirmation page. They should print and save that confirmation page and review it. Students should keep a copy of all forms they submit and copies of all documentation used to complete those forms. Once the student receives the FAFSA submission summary, they should review it, correct any errors on the FAFSA submission summary by logging into fafsa.gov, print or save a copy of the FAFSA submission summary as well as the confirmation page. Again, the FAFSA submission summary will not be sent out until sometime in March. Once each school receives the electronic FAFSA submission summary and all other required financial aid forms and confirms the student's admission status, the financial aid office will determine the student's financial aid eligibility. Some schools may request that the student submit income documentation, such as the student and parent 2022 federal income tax returns, including W-2s and all schedules and attachments, or a 2022 federal income tax return, or a federal IRS tax return transcript before they send a student a final aid determination. The school will use these and any other requested information to verify the accuracy of the data provided on the FAFSA. Schools understand that many families may have used estimated data. After students have been admitted to one or more colleges, they should watch for financial aid award notifications. These notifications are sometimes called financial aid award letters, financial aid offers, or financial aid packages, and will list the amount of grants, scholarships, work study, and loan amounts the student might be eligible to receive. Most schools will wait until the student has been accepted for admission to notify them about financial aid eligibility. Some schools will mail a paper notification to the student. Others may provide the award letter electronically or via a school portal. Although the May 1 college decision date, otherwise known previously as the National Candidates Reply Date, is no longer in force, many colleges will still require a response by May 1st. We are seeing many schools extending the deadline by which the student must make a decision beyond their original reply date. Remember, students must reapply for financial aid each year. Applying for financial aid by all published deadlines assures that the student is considered for the maximum amount of financial aid. If family circumstances change after the student completes the FAFSA and other required aid documents are submitted, make sure to contact the financial aid office at each school as soon as possible. In some cases, the student will be required to sign and return a copy of their financial aid notification indicating whether he or she accepts or declines each source of aid. Some FAFSAs will be selected for verification. We encourage students and their families to ask questions. If you do not understand what to do next or what is required of you, be sure to ask for help. Mark and I have compiled this slide that offers free help and key telephone numbers. There are a number of individuals who will offer to assist the student and family in completing the FAFSA. Be very cautious about paying anyone a fee to help you complete the FAFSA. Remember, the FAFSA is a free form, so you do not need to pay money to file the FAFSA. There are several sources of free help completing the FAFSA. The online FAFSA provides context-sensitive help information. You can also call the Federal Student Aid Information Center. If you email the Federal Student Aid Information Center, do not include personal information in the email, such as your or the student's social security number, as email is not secure. There's also a list of answers to frequently asked questions on the FAFSA website. You'll see that listed at fafsa.ed.gov/help.htm. Again, fafsa.ed.gov/help.htm. Students should feel free to contact the financial aid offices at the colleges where they are applying for help with the financial aid application process. Next slide, please. To retain eligibility for financial aid in subsequent years, the student must adhere to some academic requirements. While gift aid does not need to be earned through employment, the student must still earn their financial aid by taking and passing classes and by maintaining good grades. To retain eligibility for financial aid in subsequent years, in addition to completing the FAFSA each year and demonstrating financial need, students must maintain satisfactory academic progress, affectionately known as SAP. Students must generally maintain at least a 2.0 grade point average on a 4.0 scale in college and be passing enough classes to graduate within 150% of the normal time frame for the degree. For example, a student in a bachelor's degree that normally requires 4 years of study is considered to be making satisfactory academic progress if the student's progress is consistent with completion of a bachelor's degree within 6 years. Note that while taking 12 units or 12 credits is considered full-time for federal and state student aid purposes, to graduate on time, the student will need to take 15 credits each term. Next slide, please. So I encourage you to follow Mark on Twitter at mcant. He has great policy research at studentaidpolicy.com. All of that is free. So at this point, what we'd like to do is to answer some of the questions that have been submitted in advance of today's webinar. So Mark, I'm going to pose those questions to you, and then we'll allow you to answer those. Okay? First question we received. Mark, you ready?
Yes.
What financial assistance is there for undocumented students?
So some money is available from state governments and colleges. For example, undocumented and DACA students who graduated from a high school in Maryland and the parents filed Maryland state income tax returns for 3 years prior to the date of enrollment in college are eligible for in-state tuition at Maryland colleges and Maryland state financial aid programs. There are also some private scholarships for undocumented students, such as thedream.us, immigrantsrising.org, goldendoorscholars.org, and MALDEF, MALDEF.org.
Thanks, Mark. This question comes up quite a bit, Mark. Why can't my mom make a FAFSA account if she does not have a social security number?
Okay. So students who are U.S. citizens and permanent residents, such as green card holders, are eligible for U.S. federal student aid, regardless of their parents' citizenship or immigration status. This year, for the first time, parents who are undocumented or foreign citizens can create an FSA ID to log into the FAFSA and sign it electronically. However, there have been a lot of glitches that have caused problems this year, as this is the year that they're launching the simplified FAFSA and this new capability. The U.S. Department of Education is working on fixing these problems, so you may need to be patient. Check it every day. You could also file the FAFSA on paper. However, these paper FAFSAs will be processed last, so I don't recommend it. I just recommend being patient. I mean, there are 20 known issues, only 4 of them have been resolved to date. They're working on resolving the others.
Okay, Mark, we have some questions about independent student status. First one, can a student apply for FAFSA independently if they are still claimed on their parents' federal income tax return?
So independent student status is determined by the answers to the personal circumstances questions. Being claimed as an exemption on your parents' federal income tax return does not affect whether you are an independent student or not based on those questions. However, if you're seeking a dependency override, being claimed on your parents' federal income tax return doesn't have a, will not, if you're not claimed, doesn't make you independent. But if you are claimed, that does show that you're receiving some financial support from your parents.
Mark, we received some marital status questions. How do divorced or separated couples handle completing the FAFSA? Do they complete separate forms? Do they complete one form together? And how does this affect financial aid eligibility?
So when a student's parents are divorced, separated, or never married, only one parent is responsible for completing the FAFSA if they do not live together. If they live together, they're treated as though they're married. Now, if the only one parent is responsible, this parent is the parent who provided more financial support to the student during the 12 months ending on the date the FAFSA is filed. If both parents provide an equal amount of financial support, then it is the parent who has the greater income. That includes the income of a step parent if this parent has remarried as of the date the FAFSA is filed. Now, there is a supplemental form that is required by less than 200 mostly private colleges called the CSS profile form. This form requires information from all parents, not just the parent who provided the most financial support. Some colleges will waive the non-custodial parent CSS profile form, which is just a version of the same form, if the student has had no contact or financial support from this non-custodial parent.
Mark, I know that we've received a lot of questions about the timing of FAFSA processing. Let me provide these to you. How quickly do kids get the email telling them that their SAI, about their SAI and Pell eligibility? A lot of kids are missing this information in the email. It was much better to get it right away in prior years when the student and family submitted the FAFSA on the site. Does the government have plans to change this?
So normally you should receive the FAFSA submission summary within about 3 days of filing the FAFSA. The FAFSA submission summary includes the student's SAI and federal Pell Grant eligibility. However, this year, the U.S. Department of Education is building the FAFSA as they go along. It's like building an airplane while you're flying it. And it is delayed. It will not be sent until sometime in March or maybe later, even for students who filed the FAFSA in the beginning of January. So you will need to be patient. You won't be able to make corrections on the FAFSA until you receive the FAFSA submission summary. If the student was the last contributor to finish their part of the FAFSA, they may have seen a confirmation page with their SAI on it. However, this preliminary SAI will change when the U.S. Department of Education implements the inflation adjustments sometime by middle of March.
There's a related question, Mark. Why are certain students getting their SAI and Pell eligibility right away and some are not?
So the order in which the student and the parents complete the FAFSA may affect whether the student sees the SAI and the potential Pell Grant eligibility on their confirmation page. The student and contributors complete their section of the FAFSA separately. If the student is the last one to complete their part, they may see the SAI and potential Pell Grant eligibility on their confirmation page. If the parent completes their part last, then the student doesn't see this information. Note that Congress has not yet set the maximum Pell Grant for the 2024-25 award year because they haven't done all the appropriations bills. So the Pell Grant eligibility that they see is going to be an estimate. Now, some colleges are providing the student with estimated award offers based on the CSS profile form or a supplemental form that the college created on their own. That is not official, but that's a way for the college to try to give an award letter sooner. The actual figures may change.
I have some questions about tax information, Mark. Which taxes are required for the 24-25 FAFSA?
Right. So the FAFSA is based on income and tax information from the second previous tax year, which is also called the prior year. For the 2024-25 FAFSA, the FAFSA is based on the 2022 federal income tax returns. Income and tax information will be transferred from the IRS using the IRS Direct Data Exchange, or DDX, for most applicants. The main exception is when the parents filed a joint federal income tax return in the prior year, but are now separated or divorced and don't live together. Then they're going to be asked to provide that information manually. Do not substitute 2023 income and tax information, even if you have it available. If your income has dropped, file an appeal with the College Financial Aid Administrator. They have the authority to substitute 2023 income and tax information. You do not.
Okay, another question related to taxes. I have not filed taxes since 2021. Ooh, what can I do?
Right? If you were below the tax filing threshold for 2022, in 2022 income, and that was $12,950 for single filers and $25,900 for married filing jointly, you are not required to file a federal income tax return. The IRS Direct Data Exchange will transfer the equivalent of a verification of non-filing letter to confirm this. If you were required to file a federal income tax return and did not, however, then you will not be eligible for federal student aid until you file that tax return. There are accountants who can help people who have not filed required federal income tax returns get caught up with this process.
We have a few questions, Mark, about the FAFSA form. If you have a FAFSA account from a previous last, I'm sorry, let me read this again. If you have a FAFSA account with a previous last name, how do you go about changing it?
Well, you can log in to studentaid.gov to change your last name in your FSA ID. One of the benefits of the FSA ID is that it makes it much easier to change your name and contact information without having to create a new FSA ID. Note that you must also update the Social Security Administration, or SSA, with your new last name so that it will match your FSA ID when the U.S. Department of Education does a data match with the Social Security Administration. And they will as part of the FAFSA FSA ID confirmation process. If you haven't updated your information with the SSA, it can take a few weeks to process a change. So it may be best to file the FAFSA with your old name and then later change it to the FSA ID to match your current name at the same time as you update it at the Social Security Administration.
Great answer. Mark, what's the difference between the old FAFSA and this year's FAFSA for 24-25? Are there any questions that may mess students up due to the language or formation of the question?
Right. So the new form asks about 2/3 fewer questions. It's much simpler, and it should take most applicants less time to complete, probably about 15 minutes instead of an hour previously. Some questions have been dropped, and some questions will be answered automatically through the IRS Direct Data Exchange. Now, all contributors must provide consent and approval to transferring income and tax information from the IRS. If anybody refuses to consent, the student will be ineligible for federal student aid. Some of the terms on the form have changed names. For example, the EFC is now known as the SAI. The question about your dependency status has been confusing to some students because it asks whether to apply for a direct unsubsidized loan only. The students miss the word only. This is not asking whether you want a student loan. It is asking whether your parents are refusing to complete the FAFSA. If your parents refuse to complete the FAFSA, then the most student aid you can get is just an unsubsidized loan. Most students should answer no to this question, that their parents are going to complete the information.
Okay, Mark, we have a group of kind of miscellaneous questions on financial aid eligibility, so let me pose those to you. I can no longer receive financial aid. How can I find more funding?
If you are ineligible for student financial aid because of a failure to maintain satisfactory academic progress, for example, your GPA is less than 2.0 on a 4.0 scale, in some cases you may be able to regain aid eligibility by improving your grades. That may require a semester or two without eligibility for federal student aid. Otherwise, your main source of funding will be non-federal financial aid and maybe even not college or state aid. That can include private student loans and private scholarships. As we noted before, you can search for private scholarships. There are over a dozen different free scholarship matching services, the most popular of which are fastweb.com and the College Board's Big Future websites.
Okay, Mark, is there funding available for middle income families? Where can I find funding for middle income families? How does the simplified FAFSA impact middle income families?
Right. So we often hear this grass is always greener argument that middle income families are too wealthy to qualify for aid, but too poor to afford college. But in reality, they actually get more financial aid than low income families, um, and also more financial aid than wealthy families. Federal student aid is available for middle income families by filing the FAFSA. The FAFSA did eliminate the sibling loophole, which divided the parent contribution by the number of children in college, and the small business exclusion, which these did enable some middle income students to qualify for the federal Pell Grant previously. But these students are still eligible for student employment and student loans, as well as financial aid from the college itself. And the higher the financial need, the difference between the college's cost of attendance and the student aid index, the more aid the student will get. And middle income families tend to send their children to higher cost colleges where their financial need is greater than at an in-state public college, and therefore they will get typically more financial aid from the college itself. Now, there's also a form of federal aid that is targeted at middle income families, and that's the American Opportunity Tax Credit, or AOTC, that provides a partially refundable tax credit worth up to $2,500 on the parent's federal income tax return, and that is primarily available to middle income families. There's income phase outs that prevent high income families from qualifying, and low income families may not have a tax liability to offset.
Okay, Mark, we have one more question that was submitted prior to the webinar today. The question is a simple one. Can the FAFSA be used for vocational programs?
And the answer is simple. The answer is yes.
Okay,
If a
Mark.
vocational or technical program it qualifies for federal student aid, and they've entered into a program participation agreement with U.S. Department of Education, then you'll be able to list them on the FAFSA and then use federal student aid to pay for that college.
Thanks, Mark. We have some questions that have come through after the presentation we made today. Let me pose those to you. Can you cover the nature of the unresolved glitches with the FAFSA? That is scary to hear that we are being asked to link our IRS information.
Right. So the glitches have mostly involved creating an FSA ID, though a few also involve submitting the FAFSA. One of them involves there's a question where the student invites their parents, and then the parents create their own FSA IDs, and mixed status families where one parent's a US citizen and the other parent isn't have reported that the checkbox for saying that you don't have an FSA ID doesn't appear for the parent who doesn't have a social security number, because it's assuming that if one parent has a social security number, then both parents have. They need to fix that. There have been problems with there's a page where you have to provide um, your address and telephone number and other contact information. And some families have reported that they haven't been able to get past that page. There's a workaround, which is you leave, if you can't get past it, you delete all your information from the address, and then it lets you get past it, and then you can update it with your address information later. Um, it's and in some cases, if you type your information into the form instead of cutting and pasting it, that sometimes seems to work. Um, and there's been a lot of these little glitches that unfortunately prevent the family from completing the FAFSA or getting an FSA ID and then completing the FAFSA. There have also been problems when, if you're undocumented or a foreign citizen, in some cases, they haven't been able to get an FSA ID or complete the FAFSA because of bad assumptions that are built into the form. The U.S. Department of Education is aware of these problems and they are working on fixing them. In fact, that's probably part of the reason why they delayed the FAFSA by an additional 6 weeks to mid-March, because they needed the extra time to fix these problems, not just to make the inflationary adjustments to the FAFSA form. The data from the IRS is secure. It doesn't appear on the form at all. So it's behind the scenes that it's used to calculate your federal student aid eligibility. If you're worried that there might be an error in that information, like the student aid index that you ultimately get seems really, really high, you can contact the college financial aid office and ask them to take a look at it and tell you if there's a problem. Like if you did a Roth IRA conversion, sometimes that is reported in the wrong year in the IRS data, in which case you need to make the college aware of that if your student aid index seems really, really high compared to what your income is.
Okay, Mark, this question came in during the chat. It was mentioned during the webinar to choose the custodial parent carefully, but it was also said that the custodial parent must be the person who paid the most for the child's support. Or if they are equal, it should be the parent who has the higher income. So can the custodial parent really be chosen by the family?
Right. So the official way is the parent who provides more financial support. If they provide an equal amount of support, then it's the parent with a greater income. However, this is not subject to verification. So if the parents split everything down to the penny, and there are an even number of pennies, well, nothing prevents you from having the parent with a lower income give an extra penny to the student. um, the colleges are not allowed to verify this information, and they might verify it for their own financial aid, but not for the federal financial aid. But there's some flexibility here. Now, if the student lives with one parent, the in-kind support by the housing and food that the parent is providing does factor in. And so usually the parent where the student live, there's going to be a presumption that that is the parent who's responsible for completing the FAFSA, even though it's switched from where the student lives to which parent provides more financial support. Because food and housing is a form of financial support, but there's opportunity here for you to potentially fudge it and to choose the parent who has the lower income, including the income of a step parent, to be the one responsible for completing the FAFSA.
Okay, Mark, we have a note here thanking us for information about how to do name changes. And then there's a question. We were told our student's name change would be updated in the Social Security Administration system within 24 hours of visiting the Social Security Administration office and completing necessary paperwork. And it was. However, we were not getting a Social Security Administration match on the FAFSA website and spent a lot of time on the phone trying to straighten it out. We are now trying with the original name and crossing our fingers. Any suggestions?
Right. So the Social Security Administration says that when you talk to them, that it takes only 24 hours. But practically speaking, my experience has been that it takes longer than 24 hours for it to propagate to all their systems, and that it can take several weeks and sometimes as long as a month for that information to become available for everybody. And so the SSA, if you call them up, they may say, oh, the name's been changed, but the data match between the FAFSA and the SSA says, oh, they may have the old name. So try it with the old name and see if that works. Otherwise, when you call the 1-800-4FED-AID number and provide them with the details, what date it was changed with the Social Security Administration, that the Social Security Administration says it's been updated, but the FAFSA doesn't seem to have reflected that.
Okay, Mark, another question. How do 529 college savings plans affect financial aid eligibility?
Right. So a lot depends on who owns the 529 plan. If the 529 plan is owned by the parent who completes the FAFSA and it lists the student as a beneficiary, it's reported as a parent asset on the FAFSA. If it is a custodial 529 plan account, then it's reported as a parent asset on the FAFSA. If it is owned by anybody else, the non-custodial parent, the parent who doesn't complete the FAFSA, grandparents, aunts, uncles, complete stranger, then it is not reported as an asset on the FAFSA. Distributions from 529 plans now no longer affect aid eligibility. So now let's look at what the impact is of reporting it as a parent asset. Parent assets are assessed on a bracketed scale with a top bracket of 5.64% on the FAFSA. Student assets, it's 20% and it's a flat rate. But the only circumstance in which it would be reported as a student asset is if the student is an independent student. Now, the CSS profile requires all FAFSAs that list the student as a beneficiary to be reported on the profile form. And this asset's on a bracketed scale, and the top rate for parent assets is 5%. For student assets, it's a flat 25%. So this means that on the FAFSA, let's say you have $10,000 in a 529 plan, $564 will be treated as will be counted as part of the assets, whereas $9,436 will be sheltered. And so it is still beneficial to save for college because the impact on aid eligibility is only at most that $564. So you'll still have more money to pay for college than if you didn't save.
Thanks, Mark. Those are the only questions I see at this point. So let me ask my friends and colleagues at Central Scholarship if you've received any other questions, because I have one other request that I want to mention to you.
We have not received any additional questions at this time.
Thanks, Ms. Weiss. Mark, there has been a request from a Central Scholarship board member that we give consideration, and this will require Central Scholarship's permission, to post the questions and answers that we've provided today on someplace on the Central Scholarship website. So I would defer to my colleagues at Central Scholarship.
Yeah, and if they're willing, I'm willing.
Okay. And there
Thank
was
you, Mark.
also a request for a listing of some special circumstances.
Yeah, I put that slide back up.
Okay, it's on those samples are on the right side. And again, the free tip sheet, which I have found to be very valuable, is listed in red on the left-hand side of this slide. Thanks for putting that up, Mark.
David, I did have somebody that just wrote back that they missed a part of the answer to the question. What happens if a parent hasn't filed 2022 taxes yet?
Well, if they are required to file and they haven't filed, then they are ineligible for federal student aid unless that parent is a member of the U.S. Armed Forces, where they are not required to file for within 180 days of when they come back from a deployment to a combat area. So in that circumstance, they would not be required to file. Otherwise, the FAFSA and the federal tax information is required. And if no taxes means no aid.
Central Scholarship, there's also been a request to send out a recording of the webinar as well as a copy of the slides. Alex, Felicia, or Ms. Dorsey, President Dorsey, can you respond to that?
Yes, we will be, for those who register in attendance, we will be sending out a copy of the slide presentation. Portions of the recording may be available on our blog.
Okay, it says if a parent is a small business owner, how does this affect financial aid? Is a specific percentage of the business value deemed to be an asset?
All right. So last year, there was something called the small business exclusion, which sheltered small businesses that were owned and controlled by the family that had less than 100 full-time equivalent employees from need analysis. That has been eliminated this year. So small businesses, just like non-small businesses, must be reported as an asset on the FAFSA. The FAFSA does treat the first, it was around 700,000, but for the inflation adjustments, it may be as much as 800,000 of the worth of that business gets partially sheltered. Somewhere between 40 and 60% of the business asset is sheltered by the formula. So you report it, and it won't be assessing 100% unless it's over 800,000 or so. Then that portion above 800,000 is assessed 100%.
Okay, any other questions folks would like to submit to us? Okay, with that, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm going to turn it back over to our colleagues at Central Scholarship.
Thank you, David and Mark. This was so informative. Oh gosh, I actually learned a little bit more from this presentation. So thank you again for making the time to come out. And again, for those who are participating, we will be providing a copy of the presentation to you. And I ask that if you can take a minute or two and fill out the survey at the end, I would greatly appreciate it. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly if you have further questions after we get off of this workshop or felt too shy to put your question in the chat box. We are here for you. That concludes this FAFSA workshop and info. And keep an eye out. We're celebrating our centennial this year, and we want you to celebrate with us. So thank you again for your time. Bye-bye.